Good morning, everyone. Isn't it a beautiful morning in Austin, Texas? Thanks for starting your day with us at Leadership Austin. I'm Judy Maggio with KLRU, and I'm your captain today, so to speak, as we navigate an open, honest conversation about how our city is going to handle water for the next century and beyond. I want to first introduce Austin Board Director Julie Fisher to share a few words. And Julie has been a dedicated volunteer, I'd like to say, for Engaged Breakfast even before she was on the board. So thank you for all you've done for Leadership Austin, Julie.
Thanks, Judy. Hi, my name is Julie Fisher, and I'm the Manager of Corporate Social Responsibility at National Instruments. On behalf of the Leadership Austin Board of Directors, we welcome you to the breakfast today on Water Forward. We want to remind you of a couple goals of our breakfast. We want to inform you on important community issues, and we also want to offer a variety of different perspectives, in addition to encourage you to act. So after the breakfast, we encourage you to share the conversation from Decibel on Facebook, tell your friends, tell your families about it, and pass it on. And we want to thank all the panelists for being here today, in addition to our presenting sponsor today, Samsung Austin Semiconductor, and also our Engage Series sponsors, Texas Gas, Wells Fargo, and St. David's Healthcare. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you, Julie. So our goal at Decibel, which is KLRU's News and Public Affairs program, is to cover local issues that matter and look for solutions. And that's why this partnership with Leadership Austin makes so much sense, because we're often taking a close look at the very same topics. As Julie mentioned, we are live streaming this breakfast this morning on our Decibel ATX Facebook page. If you want to share it, there's a card there on your table, and you'll have our Facebook address. But I think we should say good morning to everyone watching on Facebook this morning. Good morning. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching and caring about water. So don't do anything you wouldn't want your mother to see you do this morning, okay? And is with tradition with all of our Engaged Breakfasts, it's called Engaged for a reason. We invite all of you to participate by texting in questions. There's the instructions right there on the big screen. And I want you to meet Melissa Miller, who is Executive Director of the Colorado River Alliance. She's going to be your voice today. She will be fielding those audience engagement questions and looking for some themes. So today, we are taking a deep dive on water. I couldn't resist. Couldn't resist a little pun. And really on the resiliency in the City of Austin's water plan. And we have some panelists here who really provide great insight and different perspective on water. So I want to introduce them to you now. First, we have Marisa Flores-Gonzalez. Marisa is the Water Forward Program Manager for the City of Austin Water Systems Planning Division. Then we have Cameron Lockley, who is the managing partner for Gusto Italian Kitchen. Yummy Italian food. Cameron will be speaking on behalf of the restaurant industry, as you know, was impacted greatly by the boil water notice. Then we have Jennifer Walker. Now, Jennifer wears a lot of hats in the water area, but she is joining this panel as the Vice Chair of the City of Austin Integrated Water Resource Planning Community Task Force. Next, we have Augusto Villalon. He is an account director for Friesen Nichols, a professional planning, consulting, and engineering firm, to get the private sector perspective on all of this. And we've already met Melissa down on the end, and as I mentioned, she will be fielding your audience questions today. So I don't know about you, but we often take clean running water for granted, right? We turn on our faucet and there it is. It is not a limitless resource, though. Development, weather patterns, climate change, many other issues impact this very precious resource. And I'm sure all of you remember the boil water notice that happened last October. This was the first one in the city's, at least modern history. And in order to replenish the city's water treatment system and address poor water quality, we were boiling our water for about a week after all those floods to get rid of the sediment and things in the water that were causing it not to be potentially not safe to drink. So everyone in Austin, schools, restaurants, businesses, we all had to rethink our day-to-day activities. It was a major adjustment. Other parts of the world, they have to do this all the time. I'm going to begin our questioning with Cameron, because you were I'm sure, greatly impacted in your business as a restaurant owner by this boil water notice. So how did it impact your business, and did you learn something from that experience?
Thanks, Judy. I consider myself many things, water expert, not one of them. But it reminded me of three things. One, that water is not a free, complimentary resource that we can just put out a glass and the rain fills up our cup. Two, that we are, as a city, underprepared for simultaneous growth in demand and increase of occurrences of severe weather, or whatever you want to call them. And those do have a financial impact on business. So whether we're closed for a day or a week, or whether we have to purchase a new type of insurance to cover the loss during those times, there is a cost, there is an impact. And three, that the preparedness training and the language that's used in the communication around these issues is also important. Was it a crisis, or was it a notice? Was it items that we should follow because our health was at risk, or were the items that we were supposed to follow out of an abundance of caution? We had guests coming into the restaurant on the first day wearing gloves and face masks, asking to buy bottled water because H-E-B down the street was completely out. And we had guests demanding their coffee regardless of whether we had boiled water for it or not. So all across the spectrum. And restaurants, for the most part, on the first day especially, didn't know how to respond. Places like Starbucks that have insurance for everything, it was an easy decision to close. But for most small businesses that don't have that type of insurance and hadn't received any prior communication, there was a myriad of responses. I was in my car and listening to NPR, so I pulled into the Twin Liquors warehouse and purchased all of their Aquapana cases that they had on hand. But that's why I think we saw a myriad of responses during that time.
Does wine substitute for water well? I just was wondering, since you...
It does for me.
Okay. I'm going to turn to you now, Jennifer. Tell us more about the history and current state of our water supply in Austin, because I don't think a lot of people think about where the water comes from, and there's really just, am I right, one source in Austin, the Colorado River?
That's correct. So Austin has a sole source water supply, the Colorado River, which runs through Austin. It's some people call it Lady Bird Lake or Town Lake, depending on how long you've been here. But so the Colorado River is our source of water supply, particularly Lake Travis and Lake Austin, which is where our water treatment plant intakes are. So the water that's coming out of your tap comes from the Colorado River, comes from those two reservoirs. So that's really important to know, and really one of my kind of short-term or takeaways is know where your water comes from, know the source of your water, and learn about it. But a little bit of context because we're talking about the Water Forward Plan today, about how we got there. We had a really extreme drought in Austin that began in 2011 and ran through 2015, finally broke in 2015. And our water supply reservoir, Lake Travis, you probably heard, went down to 33% full. And a lot of people may have heard that and not really thought much about it, but that's our water supply. So our water supply was at 1/3 of capacity for the city of Austin and many of the surrounding communities around the Highland Lakes. So in 2014, we were looking at what are we going to do as a community in case the drought doesn't break. What are we going to do for emergency water supplies? This is our only water supply in Austin. So a task force was formed, a community task force, to look at a slate of recommendations for emergency actions for water supply for the city of Austin. And I served on that task force, as well as some other people that currently serve on the Water Forward Task Force. So we came up with a slate of recommendations, but one of the recommendations was Austin needs to develop an integrated water resources plan, which is a plan that really looks at our whole water supply and all the water in our community, and looks at where future water supply options will come from, and takes a hard look at where is it coming from, how much are we using, how much are we growing. It's just a really comprehensive look at our water supply situation and how we're going to meet our needs in the future. Luckily, at the end of 2014 and through 2015, it started raining. The lakes filled back up. We didn't have to implement the emergency measures that we had contemplated as part of that community task force, but we did move forward with developing an integrated water resources plan for Austin. That was the big takeaway, that we need we need resiliency, we need options for our water supply, and we need to plan beyond the Colorado River as our water supply. And I want to also say that the Colorado River and the supply choices that Austin has made throughout the years are really good. Austin has a very good water supply. We have planned well, but we live in an era of a variable climate. We need to have different options as far as our water supply goes. The Colorado River is our sole water supply and will be our core water supply into the future. And I believe that our leaders have made really good choices, but now we have to look beyond that. So, so the recommendation to develop a water plan for Austin was accepted, and Austin Water moved forward, and City Council approved it, and we had a citizens task force that worked with the water utility and with many other city departments, and Marisa can tell you more about that, but that is how the plan came about, is on the heels of this really, really deep drought that our community experienced.
So we all think of the flooding as the spark in the Boil Water Notice, but it was in the works long before that. And it's my understanding, Marisa, that we will be facing more severe droughts and floods with climate change. So I just really want to know what this plan is, and tell us why we should all care about it, because this is our future.
Sure. I think that, here, let me try to talk louder.
There you go.
I think Cameron did a great job of illustrating from a very personal perspective why we should care, because water is integral to our everyday lives. And I really appreciate the perspective that you brought there. The Water Forward Plan, as part of that planning process, we looked at different scenarios of climate change and future droughts that could be worse than the droughts that we have experienced in the past, including this extreme drought that Jennifer described. And we looked at a future all the way 100 years into the future, because when you're planning for water supply, 100 years goes by like that. So we evaluated different strategies that we looked at with our task force and with the community. We did a significant amount of public outreach. We went to almost 100 different events or hosted different events to gather community input. And from that, we came up with a core group of strategies that formed the basis for the plan that was approved by Council in November of 2018. And those strategies include ways to save water, by transforming our landscapes to be more drought tolerant, by providing information to our customers so they could take control of their water bills or fix leaks sooner, so they could have more efficient irrigation systems, so that we could also reduce losses from our utility distribution systems. But then we also looked at ways that we could maximize our use of recycled water. So as we are using water, we're also producing water that still has value. And we looked at in the plan, are there ways that we could reuse water, or that we could use other alternative water sources like rainwater harvesting or AC condensate to be able to meet non-potable demands. And those non-potable demands are non-drinking water demands. So that's for things like toilet flushing or outdoor irrigation. We also had to look, though, at those droughts that are potentially worse than the droughts we had seen in the past. And we do have a really great source of supply. Our core Colorado River supply will continue to be our supply. But in the future, we have to think about those situations where we are in emergencies, and even in operational emergencies like we experienced with the boil water notice. And so to meet those types of demands, we are evaluating and are going to be pursuing a pilot for an aquifer storage and recovery facility. And if that pilot is successful, we can move forward with a significant amount of community and stakeholder engagement, but we would be able to move forward with potentially a full-scale aquifer storage and recovery facility. And what that is, We'd be able to take water that we have access to from our Colorado River supplies, for example, during wet times. We'd be able to convey that through a pipeline to an underground aquifer, and we'd be able to store that water underneath the ground so that it's not subject to evaporation. During really hot and dry times, water that evaporates is one of the biggest losses from your surface water supplies. So we are able to store that water underground, and then during emergencies or drought situations, we'd be able to access that water and have it for potable drinking water supplies so that we could meet the needs of our customers, for example, in restaurants who need that water.
It all makes sense. You know, when you explain it that way, it all makes sense. I always wondered, why do we need to flush our toilets with drinking water? All right, so we're going to talk about the private sector. Augusto, how does the private sector fit into this conversation as a stakeholder?
Well, thank you, Judy. To tag on to what Marissa and Jennifer talked about, you know, the one water concept encompasses all of water resources, everything from water rights, water law, watershed, environmental protection, and then walk us through the management of it, water treatment, distribution, water use, city ordinances, wastewater collection, treatment, and reuse. So the private sector, and I would expand it even to the public sector. I mean, this is, we all shoulder the responsibility to provide for the care and the conservation of water resources. This is, everybody here in this room, I'm sure, understands the growth in this region, and Texas, for that matter. And it's a finite resource. So how we manage and engage as a private sector entity or public sector, we bear the responsibility to provide and support our water plan, whether it's the regional, we didn't talk about that, but the regional plan as well as the water forward plan. LCRA has a water management plan. It's a state approved document that is developed. I think the first time, the first one that they developed was probably 30 years ago in the late 80s. And it's updated. It's a dynamic document, no doubt, much like probably the water forward plan as well. So the challenge for us is to be engaged and bring our neighbors and bring our constituents and our colleagues to events like this. It's important. You know, this is, like Jennifer said, we live in a region that is subject to extreme events, both drought and flood. Look what just happened last year in 2018, sorry, in the Llano River. That was historic. That was an outlier. If you look at the bell curve, that was way off on the edges. So it's up to us to shoulder the responsibility to maintain our water supply and manage our use in an effective manner.
I want to take some audience questions because I know this is a topic that affects everybody's life. Melissa, do you have some questions for us?
Yeah, it looks like we're getting a lot of questions about population growth. Obviously, we know that's a huge threat to our water supply. We're getting questions about what is our biggest challenges. Obviously, I think we can say population growth. Does our regional growth exceed our water supply? And should growth be curbed in some way? There's also another question about paving over of land. Can y'all kind of talk to
Seems like a theme.
population? Yes, definitely.
Population growth, development, and how that impervious cover impacts the water supply.
Sure.
Who wants to start with that one?
I'll start, and then maybe the rest of our
I'm going to keep
panel
moving
can-
this closer to you, Marisa.
Oh. I'll just be right on top of it. I'll start, and the rest of our panel can add on. So in terms of population growth, yes, we incorporated that into our planning, that we would expect to see a strong population growth continue within the city of Austin. This Water Forward plan was focused on strategies for our city of Austin supply, so we mainly focused on the city's growth, but we also incorporated demand projections in terms of the regional growth and the effects that could have on our Colorado River and Highland Lakes supplies into the future. Looking forward, we developed projections that would show that our population is expected to grow from about 1 million people today to, in 2115, about 4 million people. So that's a significant amount of growth, and if you think about all of the development that would occur alongside that, that's a significant amount of future development. Our strategy here is to use those options that we have identified that can be incorporated into future development as incremental solutions to incorporating greater conservation and efficiency, as well as development of more on-site non-potable supplies to be able to offset that amount of increased demand. So we can use development itself as a tool to creating additional conservation and on-site non-potable resources in the future. I'll kind of leave it there so that other folks can.
And anybody else want to weigh in on the whole, how are we dealing with the surging population of our region and especially Austin?
Yeah, I'll just say that it's always interesting to see the looks on people's faces when the word 4 million comes out. Mm-hmm. There was some good animated looks on or horror on folks' faces because that is really a stunning number. So for me, looking at the population growth of the region and planning for our water supplies, we're looking at Austin, but we're also part of a larger region, and that also relies on this water supply. So I think for me, one of the takeaways is that it's really important that all the communities that rely on this source of water supply take a really hard look at how they're using water and look into the future. And we're not all there yet, but many communities are. And to also realize that we have in this region all the way down where we are the source of water downstream for many communities as well, and into Matagorda Bay, which is a really important estuary. So there's a whole region, and this river connects us. So it's not just about Austin and its growth, but also us doing the best we can with the supplies we have so that the whole region can thrive as well.
Augusto, I probably should have gotten you to explain what your firm does and what your role is in the private sector and where that fits in. If you could let everybody know real quick about that.
Sure. I'm with Freese & Nichols. It's a consulting engineering company. This year actually is our 125th anniversary that we've been providing consulting engineering services to our clients. Essentially, we've grown with Texas, headquartered in Fort Worth, and we've got offices all over Texas and the southeast, as well as Oklahoma. We, like many other consultants, assist our clients, people like the LCRA, people like City of Austin, municipalities all throughout Texas, manage basically building cities, building, what is the infrastructure needed for the growth that we're experiencing here. So
I thought that would parlay well into, so if people understand where you come from this development perspective, you have a up-close look at it.
Right. Everything from transportation, water, wastewater, aviation. It's municipal engineering is basically building cities. All the infrastructure that you see and you don't see that's required to run a city like this is what we do. So there's several consultants out here that I see. We're just one of many consulting engineering companies that that work at infrastructure development.
So do we have another question, Melissa?
Yeah, so just to feed off of the last question, do you guys, we're getting another question about, will the population growth exceed our water supply?
So like I mentioned, we incorporated our projections of population growth into the planning process as part of Water Forward. The way that you start to do this type of plan is you have an assessment of what does your growth look like into the future, and then what does that equate to in terms of demands. So we build very detailed models that simulate demands for different sectors: single-family residential, multifamily residential, different subsectors of commercial, and we project how much growth we'll see in those different sectors, how much growth in demand then we'll see in those different sectors. And that kind of sets some boundary conditions. What are we solving for? What is the problem that we're solving for? Then as part of this planning process, we layer on different strategies as part of groupings to try and meet those demands into the future. And with the demand management, with the decrease in demand through those different strategies, as well as the addition of new non-potable supplies, as well as new potable supplies, we believe that we've set a good foundation for our future with this Water Forward plan, even in the light of this population growth and additional uncertainty with drought and climate change in the future.
Would it be so far as to say that, for example, when we're building a new home, could the plumbing be done so that we don't have to use the clean water to flush our toilets and things like that? Is that an out of reach goal?
No, it's not at all. And actually within the plan, we have a strategy to develop a dual plumbing ordinance. So dual plumbing is just a separate set of pipes within a building that would allow you to use non-potable water to flush toilets, for example, or for urinals, or for other indoor uses that could be met with non-potable water. You, of course, want to be very careful about keeping your potable and your non-potable systems separate.
Oh, yes.
And that's something that
I don't want to drink that water. Thank you very much.
Right. That's why we have to have a thoughtful and considered approach when we're developing these ordinances, when we're developing these requirements for new development, because, of course, we want to be very protective of public health and safety. However, the utility is committed to implementing these ordinances so that we have new development that's as efficient as it possibly can be.
I always wonder what innovations other communities are doing, and how is Austin's approach, different or similar, because everybody in the country is facing this issue. Everybody in the world is facing this whole issue of water. So how are they addressing it? What are some things we can learn from innovations in other places?
So I think that we can actually learn from some of the things that we're doing right here.
Great.
And I'll say right in this building, in the our new central library, this is something that's happening in other cities, but it also builds off your question about what we do in our homes. But this facility, this building, has a dual plumbing system. It captures the AC condensate, the condensation water from air conditioning, the drips that you see outside next to your air conditioner. It captures that. It captures rainwater, stores it in a cistern, and then pumps it back into the building to be used in the irrigation system and for toilet flushing. This building does that, and 90% of the total amount of water that this building used is generated on site. So what Marisa was talking about on-site reuse. So this building, 90% of the water that is needed to run this building is made or created or captured on site here, and stored and cleaned and then pumped back through the building. That means that all that water needed to run this facility is not taken out of our potable system, our drinking water supply. These are the kinds of innovations that we'll see in the future. This is innovative for Austin, and it's innovative for many cities, but it's absolutely something that's being done in other places, and we'll see more of it on different scales. So we have this wonderful example here where you can know that, a fraction of the water that's needed to run this building for drinking fountains, for the restaurant, et cetera, are coming off of our drinking water system, leaving more capacity for the growth and the other things that are happening. So that is something that's innovative, that's happening in other cities, but that's also happening here in Austin, right here in this building that we're sitting in, which is really great. I'm a huge fan of this like living laboratory, and they're also very generous about explaining and showing folks the system. It's very simple. You'd be very surprised. The other thing that I think that is really great about our plan here in Austin is that we're really trying to rely on locally available water supplies and not going into the surrounding community, building pipelines or other things to bring water in. We're going to try to live within our means here in Austin, create facilities that make water for our communities, use the right water for the right use. This is something that is unique to our plan and very important and something I'm very proud of.
And Augusto, I guess when you're designing and consulting on water issues, have you seen some great innovation that is encouraging as when it comes to conservation and how we're going to face this water shortage in the future?
Sure. I think innovation comes when there's a driver, whether there's a shortage of supply and so forth. Friesen-Nichols was honored to have been selected and designed the first potable reuse project in the Western Hemisphere. It's the second in the world. The Colorado River Municipal Water District up in Big Spring. They were faced with a shortage of supply. And the question was where was the next water supply going to come from? And the driver was economics. And the alternative to going to traditional supplies, surface water, was to pipe it from 100 miles or more. So the district and its constituents looked at the feasibility of wastewater reuse, potable reuse. And that was constructed about 6-7 years ago. It's in operation. It's the second one in the world and the first one in this hemisphere. So I think, as Jennifer talked about, you know, the need for alternative water supplies is driven by the lack of a sustainable traditional supply that we have.
Cameron, we talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but I'm wondering, moving forward, are you guys in the restaurant business going to be comparing notes more? I mean, I remember when I was at Hoover's last week, and they had signs everywhere that said, "We care about Austin water. Don't waste the water." You know, those kinds of things. Are there ways that businesses can kind of collaborate in the restaurant business to, you know, deal with this in the future when it comes to these water shortages or boil water notices?
Well, we certainly know what to expect now if
Right,
this
yeah.
was to happen again, and be more prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I was reminded, and I was thinking about it this morning, getting ready for today, that every time I've traveled anywhere in Europe, you know, all the big cities, you get charged for tap water, even at the table.
We're kind of spoiled here.
Yeah, absolutely. And so certainly being thoughtful about our water sources and our water usage is on our forefront. But yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. So it's my understanding that last month we learned the City Council wanted to expedite implementation of this Water Forward plan. But Austin Water doesn't foresee the plan really going into effect for another, 3 years. So I'd love to look at the benefits and challenges of delaying implementation of Water Forward. So what are the pros and cons here?
I really appreciate you asking that question. So in November of 2018, Council approved the Water Forward plan, and we had an implementation timeline that was associated with the plan. That showed that we would have draft ordinances, draft ordinance language delivered by March of 2020, and that we would have ordinance language revised and ready for boards and council and commission action by March of 2021, I believe. And that's just a subset of the plan. As I mentioned, there are lots of other strategies within the plan that we are working on right now to implement. So the plan is in the doing phase. We are doing things to implement the plan currently and have been since November 2018. What I think we're talking about here is specifically those ordinances and then potentially some of the incentives that are included within the plan strategies. At the March 12th task force meeting, we had the opportunity, Austin Water presented to the task force that we would accelerate our schedule by about 3 months in terms of the delivery of draft ordinance language and accelerate 3 months in terms of the delivery of revised ordinance language. And then hopefully, since we had a robust stakeholder process baked into our schedule, we would see a shortening of the boards and commissions and council approval process and hopefully gain about 6 months there. I think that it's clear that the task force felt that that wasn't sufficient, so we're looking forward, or I'm looking forward to working with the task force as well as others in our community to refine our shared understanding of the timeline of this project while we're still maintaining a robust stakeholder engagement process so that diverse voices are heard. It's very important as part of this water planning process that we engage different communities who are not traditionally involved in these processes. To be quite honest, the traditional stakeholder who's involved has a high water literacy, is highly educated, is white, is male, and is older. And we have been seeking, as part of this water forward process, planning process and implementation process, to expand our stakeholder engagement beyond those traditional boundaries.
Yeah, so I always want to look at our discussions through an equity lens, and I'm glad that you segued into that. I want to talk about the power dynamics around water management. So how do we create these points of engagement for communities of color? And as you said, they're not generally exposed to conversations about the environment and water. So how do we engage that community? Because it's an important voice in all of this.
So let me get closer to this microphone again. I think that I appreciate the question about engaging as many parts of the Austin community as we can. It's something that we've talked about throughout the whole planning process and has been very important. I think that that we have to think outside the box. We have to invest resources, not only financial resources, but also time to build relationships, to talk to as many people as we can and to meet them where they are. A great example of that is the Colorado River Alliance they really focus on education programs. They have a mobile river, going back to water literacy and where your water comes from, but they have a mobile river that they take to every middle school in Austin. If your child's in 7th grade, when your child goes through 7th grade, there's a very high chance that they will go through this program and learn about where their water supply comes from and play all kinds of games about making choices about your water supply and how it impacts upstream and downstream. Those kinds of programs are super important to educating people not only about their water supply, but just to get them to start to think about this. I think that we have to use creativity. We have to have lots of different entry points. Austin Water went around and did workshops at every library in every district during the development of the Water Forward Plan process. They provided childcare at those. I thought that was great. I mean, that's hard. I remember going to wanting to go to community events when my child was little, and you know, is it gonna be hard to do that? Are they gonna be running around making noise? No, they're gonna have fun with other kids because Austin Water has thought through providing childcare at these things. So I think we just have to take a creative approach, but we also have to really make the investment, and that is sometimes hard to do and hard to justify.
Melissa, I really love the mobile river. idea.
We
We're
do
actually going to
too.
be working with you guys on a story about it. But tell us about some other questions, and if you want to talk more about what you all do to educate people throughout the community, that would be great too.
Sure, sure. Yeah, Jennifer touched on it, and we really focus on education and engagement within our communities, and we really look to educating kids who it's our hope that we go home and they're the ones that tap their parents on the shoulder and say, you need to turn the water off when you brush your teeth. And so we really feel like it starts with our children, and the Mobile River is one program that we have that, as Jennifer said, visits the 7th grades around Austin. Then we also have another program, our Redbud educational programs. So they're field trips for 3rd through 5th graders out at the LCRA Redbud Center. So that's a little bit about what we're doing, but like we said, we really think it starts with a mindset that we feel like starts at a young age. So I think there's some questions here. We kind of talked about obstacles to the plan. What can communities do to help with those obstacles as far as stakeholder education and implementation, and what can businesses do?
Good question. What can businesses do? What can the private sector do to support water conservation efforts, you know, not only internally, but within those communities that they serve?
Well, I'll just mention that even before we sat down, I was mentioning to Cameron, we have lots of programs, rebate programs that are targeted to our commercial, industrial, and institutional sector. For example, for restaurants, we have commercial kitchen rebates that are available for more water efficient pre-rinse spray valves, for different dishwashers, that can make your kitchen more water efficient, and also provides a benefit to the business because you're not using as much water, so you're able to manage your water bill and the money that you're paying to the water utility each month. We also have other commercial rebates that are available, and those include a really exciting program called Bucks for Business. We have up to $100,000 that's available for commercial properties to install water use efficiency projects, and that could include something like rainwater harvesting or some sort of other alternative on-site reuse system that you could then use for non-potable needs inside of your building or for outdoor irrigation. And all of this has the benefit of providing a conservation offset for a community, for the utility, but then it also provides a financial benefit for the business as well. It's in a business's interest to reduce their water usage and manage their water bills.
Anybody else want to weigh in on how the business community can support these efforts?
Let me jump in real quick. Like Melissa said, the Colorado River Alliance is basically raising the water IQ of the region. And there are a lot of other nonprofits, like the Central Texas Water Efficiency Network is a great organization. Most of our water loss is due to inefficiencies in how we manage the water, whether it's at home, whether it's in our businesses, and so forth. So if raising the water IQ of the public is extremely important in terms of shouldering that responsibility to care for the water use and conservation of that resource.
This is a question for everybody. And I know this has been really the theme of the entire conversation, but talk about why this issue around our water supply is an all-hands-on-deck obligation. Why should all of us really care about this?
I'll bite. Fundamentally, it's economic development. There's a lot of other reasons, but let me share a story to highlight this point. I moved to Texas in 1990 from South Florida, and it was an aha moment for me. After I had moved here, a couple of months later, the company that I was working for, I was in Houston, they sent me to San Antonio for a water conference there. And the water conference was sponsored by the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank. Now, this is a Cuban immigrant from South Florida coming here to Texas, and I'm looking at this water conference with sponsored by this Dallas Federal Reserve Bank. And so during the conference, under one of those networking breaks, I walked up to the MC, the representative from the Federal Reserve Bank, and I said, look, this may be a stupid question, but I've only lived here a couple of months. What is the Dallas Federal Reserve doing sponsoring a water conference in San Antonio? And the guy didn't skip a beat. He said economic development. If San Antonio doesn't get a handle on its water issues, it's not going to develop like it should. And that was really an aha moment for me, because I came from South Florida, at the time very prolific water supply, the Floridan Aquifer, and it was, I had taken it for granted. And here I was, a consulting engineer in water resources, and came from a place that water supply was not an issue. We didn't have this back then. Now they're having it down, because they've got some issues down there as well along the coast. But it was the first time that I'd ever connected water supply to economic development. So there's a lot of other reasons why all hands on deck, but I just wanted to mention that.
Who else wants to talk about all hands on deck?
If for no other reason, it's because I don't want to have to boil water to wash lettuce or make ice cubes for old fashions.
Yeah.
So I'll say that we all have a role to play, and it's maybe an overused phrase, but we really do all have a role to play in our water future in Austin. The way that the plan is planned out is that our individual actions, we have individual responsibility for making sure that we can live within our means, within our water footprint in this community. Austin Water will 100% lead the way and provide a framework and a pathway for that to happen, and develop tools and incentives and ordinances, and they're going to work with other city departments, and they're going to educate the community along the way. So they'll lead the way, but we all have to get on board in order to make this vision for our community happen. And if we do, we're going to be very resilient, and we're going to be a community that is relying on our local water supplies, but is also a good friend to our neighbors and a good friend to downstream community that has a thriving environment, which also needs water. So that's the goal. We all have to take personal responsibility for that. For me, that means like bugging my kid about showers and leaving the water running and all that, down to planting gardens at my house that don't really need much water. I'm really only concerned about like my pecan tree. That's the only thing that gets water around my house. But there's a way to do that, and it's from very simple things to really complicated things like this state-of-the-art building that we're building that people may not even know that they're in a facility that does this. But
I didn't know until you mentioned it.
It's very cool.
All hands on deck, Marisa.
So that's a great question, and this really is an all hands on deck because we all have a vested interest in how we manage our water resources. It touches every single one of our lives, and I think the stories and the comments that we've shared up here just illustrate that. As Austinites, whether you're living on the east side, whether you're living north, south, or west, we all have a vested interest in our water supply and in how we use water. So of course we all have individual responsibility to conserve, but we also need to participate in the discussions about how we manage our water. We need to take the opportunity to have diverse voices heard and to participate in those discussions. As Austinites and as Texans, it's up to us to preserve a certain quality of life for ourselves, but not only for ourselves, for our children and for the generations that'll come after us. And that's really the gist of developing a 100-year plan. This isn't just about us. This is about all of the people that will come after us, and this is about preserving the Austin and the Central Texas environment that we love. So that's really why it's important to all of us.
Well said. It's time for our call to action, and since we're starting a little bit earlier than we normally do, but we have 5 people to talk about a call to action. So I'm actually going to start down on the end with Melissa. Because I would love for you to participate in this. Sure. And really, we're looking for short-term and long-term action steps that everybody in the audience today can take to continue to be involved in these important issues of water in our community.
Sure. I think that some of it I touched on earlier. I think that long-term, it's about a mindset, and it's about instilling it into our children, and really letting them know that this is something important we need to pay attention to now for our children's future. I know when I started with the Colorado River Alliance about 8 years ago, our dialogue was much different because our grasses were brown and our lake was scary dry, and it was we were having different conversations because people saw the impact on our communities firsthand, and we were affected by the water restrictions in one way or another. And it looks a lot different when our lakes are 98% full like they are today, which is amazing, but I think it's something we have to keep driving towards conservation and taking those measures at home. And that would be the answer to the short-term question, is that we're doing what we can on a daily basis in our own homes, and we act like we are in a drought even when we're not, and we look ahead towards the future and keep reminding our children and our future generations about that.
Augusto?
Become a water geek. You know, geeks are cool these days. 30 years ago they weren't so much, but to launch off of what Melissa was talking about, become informed in our water supply. I mean, let me ask you, how many people know what the total combined capacity of Lake Travis and Buckhannon are today?
Jennifer.
That's a water geek. So, that's like Melissa said, that is a measure. The combined capacity of Lake Travis and Buckhannon basically dictates how the LCRA will manage the water resources in the basin through the water management plan. I encourage you to go on their website and look at that water management plan, even if it's just to read the executive summary. It's very informative. I talked about San Antonio earlier today. I would say there's a large population in San Antonio that knows what the elevation of a monitoring well down there named J107. Probably 40% of the public down there, I don't know, but a large population does. And that's not a flip of a switch. That takes a lot of time to inform the public and raise the water IQ of the public. So become a water geek, engage in the community through the Alliance and other nonprofits like Central Texas Water Efficiency Network. There's
many of the conservancies we have here.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, I totally agree with becoming a water geek, although you don't have to be that extreme about it, but there's some really great resources to do that. On my day job, I work on water supply planning and water policy. We have a whole website filled with information about water policy at the state level down to the local. You can go to texaslivingwaters.org and sign up for our newsletter and just dip a toe in or take a deep dive on and try to really learn about water policy, not just in Austin, but at the state level to kind of get some perspective. I encourage everybody to go to the Austin Water website and just type in Water Forward Plan, and it'll get up there. The first link is is a booklet summary of the Water Forward Plan, and it has really great illustrations of each of the water projects that are included in the plan. I learn better through cartoons and drawings and illustrations. So people that respond to that, it's great. It's a great way to flip through and just see what's in there, and it has cost and water. So it's an easy way versus reading the plan that's this thick. You can get the 18-page booklet and just see what's in your plan, because this is our community. The other thing I'll say is look at your water bill and see how much you're using. I don't know if folks do that. I do it, and I show it to my kid, who's very unimpressed with me every month. Look how much water. But look and see how much water you're using, and think about if there's a way to reduce it, because it's often stunning to see that. Austin's going to be moving towards putting in a metering system on our homes that will allow us to actually see how much water you're using, and separate it out, and like this is how much my irrigation system is using, and et cetera. Well, you'll get some really great water information. That's going to be a couple years what that rolls out to different neighborhoods, but that's going to be a really great way to increase your water IQ. And then everybody in this room now knows where your water comes from if you didn't already, but tell some other folks and pay attention to what's happening on Lake Travis and the Colorado River and downstream, because all these water supplies and aquifers and rivers, they're all connected.
Cameron?
Well, in addition to drinking more wine, and
like
in
your
addition to knowing where
solutions.
your water comes from, know where your food comes from. So we use only Village Farms tomatoes, which are grown in the West Texas desert, just outside of Marfa, and they are all hydroponically grown in giant greenhouses, extremely water efficient. There's an abundance of sunlight and very little water where these tomatoes are grown, but they are tasty, and they're available year-round. And I've been to the facility and seen their operations. It's really cool.
Great idea. I hadn't thought of that. And finally, Marisa?
Yeah, so we are engaging stakeholders about the implementation of this plan. And one of the near-term things we're going to do is we're going to host on June 25th a summit to really kick off the stakeholder engagement for some of our core ordinances related to on-site reuse and dual plumbing, and potentially some of our incentives as well. So that at that time we'll have the opportunity to get some in preliminary stakeholder input on those ordinances, and that'll help us to inform how we develop those ordinances, what they look like. And it would be a really great opportunity for businesses, for engineers, for developers, for architects, landscape architects, on-site reuse system installers and operators, and anyone who is really interested in the tactical ways that we're going to implement this plan. It would be a great way for them to learn more and to be able to engage with us. So that's going to be June 25th, and we're likely going to be hosting that at the ABOR facility, and we'll be sending out save the dates and updates as we move closer.
Wonderful. And before we close and thank our panel, I have a couple of other dates. So if you guys want to get out your iPhones or get out a piece of paper, I'll tell you a couple more dates. So June 25th, probably at ABOR. Will it be in the evening or?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, in the afternoon. All right. And I have some Leadership Austin dates for you. We hope to see everybody at the next Engage Breakfast on May 8th. May is National Mental Health Month, and we'll be discussing youth mental health and trauma. Important discussion coming up on May 8th. Also on April 23rd, you're invited to Leadership Austin's Kickoff Recruitment Reception, and this will be held at the Browning Hangar in Mueller, and the doors open for that at 5:30 in the evening. You can find out more about the different programs offered by Leadership Austin. And on May 31st, Leadership Austin will be hosting the best party ever for the best classes ever. If you have been part of Leadership Austin, you know that your class is always the best class ever. So you can find out how to get tickets to that. And finally, I want to tell everyone that KLRU's half-hour special on water, our Decibel episode, will be running the last Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of this month. And just see the local listings. I think it's 7:30 on the last Friday and 6 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday. And we'll be talking about a lot of the issues and illustrating them on our special. So now is the time to thank our wonderful panelists for their great insight and perspective today. Thank you all for shedding light on this and helping us take a deep dive on water. Thank you all for giving us your morning. Enjoy this beautiful day in our city.